Heralded as the natural successor to Pep Guardiola at Manchester City, there's a lot of expectation and pressure on Roberto De Zerbi. Since joining Brighton 20 months ago, De Zerbi has caught widespread attention and been lauded with praise for his commitment to playing exciting, attacking, possession-based football. It's drawn stark comparisons to that of Guardiola's City. However, this season Brighton have fallen short of expectations. They've fallen from 6th in the Premier League to 10th, been knocked out in the Europa League and failed to challenge in the domestic cups. Following their recent defeat to Arsenal, a club Brighton have had strong recent history against, questions are being asked of De Zerbi's abilities. In this video, we discuss, is Roberto De Zerbi overrated? Alright, let's talk about Roberto De Zerbi then, and more specifically whether or not he's overrated. I think to really tackle this, first we need to look at Brighton's season, analyse whether it's been a success or failure, and to what extent it's been a failure or a success. I think that's the more interesting bit, because Brighton, what were Brighton's expectations coming into this season, Harry?
Yeah, I mean, obviously last season they gave themselves a very, very good board to spring off, really, qualifying for Europa League football and having a very good season all round, going far in competitions and playing some very nice football. So you'd have thought, after that campaign, going into this season, they'd have wanted the same, if not better. Maybe look for a trophy, maybe look for that Champions League qualification. However, that's not what they've got.
No, and I feel like it's the same sort of situation that we've got in Newcastle at the moment, where they would have looked to want to consolidate their position or even improve upon it, but actually the consequence of that increased schedule, of rotation of squad, a bit of change there, and that natural sort of drop-off has all occurred, and it's caused an issue for both those clubs. Brighton, though, have been hit particularly hard. Let's have a look at their season then, because they're 10th in the Premier League right now, which is a drop from 6th. That's not impossible to make up, considering how bad United are at the moment, but with Chelsea looking like they might actually challenge at some point this season, with United looking like they're going to get away with some pretty disreputable performances. You've got West Ham in there who keep getting some sort of wins somehow. So yeah, it's very difficult to compete at the moment. Europa League was round of 16. Now, admittedly, they got a very difficult tie against Roma.
Well, that was embarrassing.
I think a year ago you'd have said that was winnable.
Yeah, I mean, that was a shocking result, really. I mean, Brighton have always had that kind of loss in them. They've always been a bit hit and miss, but usually, especially across last year, they would hit more times than they missed.
Yeah.
This season, they've had a lot of bad games. They've had a lot of really poor results. And that Roma one, I mean, Lukaku and co tore them to shreds. They were really poor in that time.
Yeah, and then obviously FA Cup, well, both domestic cups, early knockouts, 5th round in the FA Cup, 3rd round in the Carabao Cup. Carabao Cup was to Chelsea, that was a 1-0 loss. Nicholas Jackson scored in that game, and the FA Cup was to Wolves, again, a 1-0 loss. Somewhat disappointing, because those feel like winnable games. Yeah. They could have got far in those cups. When Chelsea made it all the way to the final, if they'd had that same route, they probably would have also made the final. Yeah. So it does feel like an opportunity missed there for Brighton, and the reason we want to do this video, I saw a bit of discourse online at the moment, especially after the Arsenal game, is De Zerbi overrated? And obviously, we know Roberto De Zerbi's been linked with a lot of high-profile jobs. He's been heralded as a really good coach because his football is very good. But Arsenal at the weekend, it was somewhat of a drubbing, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was really poor. Again, they were taken to, put for the ringer. They really were. Arsenal, pure domination in that game. And this is the thing about De Zerbi football that we've seen happen and is happening at the moment, is it works. It is lovely football, but it only works on its day. And the problem is there are too many days where it just does not work, and they get trounced usually. I think Brighton don't seem to lose nip and tuck games, close games. They either win by a canter or they get absolutely play off the park and they lose quite badly.
Yeah, I somewhat agree. I don't think it's for the same reason you say that. I don't think necessarily the football's inconsistent. I think that you're trying to play very good football with players that perhaps aren't up to the task. And with a couple of players that have left this summer, they've definitely become a little weaker. Anyway, we're going to get to the players that have left in a moment. Let's talk about the Arsenal game, because we need first, before we talk about what Brighton did wrong, let's talk about what Arsenal did well, because that really summarises. And obviously, you do have to give a little bit of leeway. It is Arsenal. They played very good football. They executed their game plan professionally, and they played excellently. That's why they won 3-0. However, in recent history, Brighton have always had the measure of Arsenal. In their last 5 meetings, Brighton have won 3, Arsenal 2. And Brighton beat them like 3-4-0, I think, last season. So it feels to me like this game is really representative of where Brighton have fallen down this season. And we'll talk about why that is in a moment. But let's talk about the game. I want to talk about the goals, because they all follow a similar sort of pattern, other than the third one. But that Brighton got stretched out much too easily by Arsenal. Arsenal were overloading on both flanks, mainly on that right-hand side in the second half, from the left-hand side in the first half. And they were dragging a lot of Brighton players out of position. And that's how they got that penalty, because they dragged the players over to the right-hand side. They switched it over to the left-hand side where Gabriel Jesus was. He was one-on-one with Lamptey. And it felt like a very inexperienced challenge from Lamptey. It was clumsy. He brings down Jesus in the box and it's a penalty. Stonewall. And that was a real sign of things to come. Arsenal spreading Brighton a lot, stretching the pitch, and then switch the play quickly, which is quite, often what Arsenal do and what elite teams tend to do. That caught Lamptey unaware. And Lamptey's another one where I go, is he really at the level to be able to play this Zerbi brand of football?
Yes, I think that is a interesting question, because that is, for me, I think Lamptey's a good player, but is he a European quality player? Not for me. And again, there's as you say, there's a few in there, but yeah, Brighton they look like they look like they couldn't cover any of the pitch. They were constantly chasing the game, and realistically, Arsenal, the way they knocked the ball around, they were just toying with them. They really were. And the poor Brighton players couldn't keep up at some points.
Yeah, as for the second goal, Arsenal was scrapping for possession on the right-hand side. That was a little bit messy from both teams. Neither could really get control of the ball. Then I think it fell to Ben White. He slides it into Jorginho into the box, and Havertz finishes in the 6-yard box. You can't really afford to be giving time and space. Jorginho had way too long to pick out that pass. And Jorginho is the one that's bursting into the channels and causing you issues. That in itself is a problem. That's not what Jorginho tends to do. Havertz, though, bursting through the middle. He's been really good this season for Arsenal. And again, picking up a goal here. It's his 9th of the season. Good stuff for Kai Havertz. The third goal was slightly different because that was the Leandro Trossard goal. But this was perhaps showing of another issue that Brighton had, and that was their high line. Brighton had a very high line in this game. They were playing, at this moment, they were playing beyond the halfway line. And they lose the ball, and Trossard was able to run beyond the defenders and still be onside because they weren't at the halfway line yet. So the ball gets fed through, Trossard's in acres, and it's a very good finish, to be fair to him. A very, very good finish because he takes it to the right of the goalkeeper, or to the left of the goalkeeper, to the right of the pitch, and then dinks it over him. It was a very, very good finish. But it could have been avoided if Brighton just sat off a little bit more, gave him a little bit more leeway. But it feels to me that De Zerbi's football is good, but it requires you to have a very good team. And so this might potentially dispel the fact he's overrated. It might just be that he's not got the players to play that sort of football. What would you think of that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. Just on that high line point, that's basics of football. I don't care what football you're trying to play. As a defender, you don't bring your line further than the halfway line, because then you are just playing everyone on side, because that's.
I think it depends what team you're playing against. I think it's very team dependent because we've seen this season Arsenal have their back four on the edge of Sheffield United's box. That's you can do that against Sheffield United. Well, exactly. You can't do that against an Arsenal side who are very good at pressing and winning that ball back and breaking quickly.
This is where, and I think this is interesting with De Zerbi, is I'm not going to comment on whether I think he's overrated or not, but this is maybe a bit of naivety, maybe a bit of, just not being aware. He plays very good football, but the problem is you can't play that football in the Premier League against every other team because he's not the best team. If Brighton were the best team in the league, and Man City and Arsenal, they could play his football. But what he needs to realise is there's 6 or 7 teams in this league that are better than him, and you can't rock up the Emirates and play that brand of football to that extent. Yes, play your football, but you have to adjust to your opponent, I think, because to be honest, the way Brighton set up, they were asking to lose already. Yeah.
I think it's similar to the criticism that Guardiola's faced throughout his career, that his football wouldn't work at a lower level. And I do sort of understand that sentiment, because if he tried to do that in League 2 with Crawley, they would get relegated.
The prime example is Vincent Kompany. He's got promoted with Burnley. He's come to the Premier League trying to play his football, play nice football. And the situation they're in, they can't afford to do that. You can't go to being the second worst team in the league. You can't rock up away at Newcastle and try and play good football. Yeah,
there's a reason that Luton Town, who finished third and quite a way off Burnley last season, have been stronger in the Premier League than Burnley have.
Doughty, bang, Morris, bang, part of the bus now, we won the lap. Whereas Burnley try and play this lovely football, it don't work.
Yeah. Let's talk about then reasons why it's gone wrong for Brighton this season. Perhaps take that blame off of De Zerbi, because I think there's some clear issues. The first of which is that Brighton are a selling club. They have been for a
Yeah.
while now. They still are to this day. If Brighton want to make serious inroads in Europe, they've got to find a way of retaining their talent a little bit better. Now, I think that will probably come with time. They're still developing their squad to be in a place where they then can just chop and change players. They can lose someone and replace him with someone of equal quality. But that's not the reality at the moment. Brighton lose a player and they replace him with a child who hasn't played football at that level yet. And I feel like that was particularly strong this season because they didn't really have a replacement for Moise Caicedo. They didn't really have a replacement for Alex and McAllister. And still hasn't been great this season. Brugge's been a little bit messy. I feel like they lost a lot with Robert Sanchez. So those three, huge in terms of who they are, in terms of players, because they are all brilliant players, and in terms of the impact they had in the dressing room, because they're all big voices, big names. So I feel like Brighton didn't adequately replace any of those. If you look at their midfield this season, it's been Billy Gilmour, who's already at the club, who is a good player, but does he push those European levels? Possibly not.
Playing for Norwich a couple of years ago.
He was, and to be fair though, he has played well this season when called upon. He is now currently injured, which is another thing we need to talk about in a moment. But you've got players like Pascal Gross has played like 400 different positions this season. They've had one senior left back who got injured at the start of the season. He's only just back now, Pervez Stupinian. You've had Josh Hinchelwood, who's a midfielder in the academy, come in and have to play right back for them. They've had quite a few issues with squad depth. And if you look at their last summer, they signed Mahmoud Dahoud, who doesn't exactly replace what you lose in McAllister and in Moise Caicedo, and then they've let him leave again in January because he's been so poor. So I feel like last summer Brighton really got it wrong. They didn't really replace their talents adequately.
Yeah, I like I love the way they manage it though. I do. I respect it massively. I think it is very smart. Buying in these incredible talents, selling on for massive profits, and then bringing in more talent. But the problem is that model does not work at the top end of football. It works when you're a mid-table club. It works in the Championship. It works in. But when you are gunning for the top 4 positions in the Premier League, the top 6 positions, when you're looking to win trophies, that model will not cut it because you can't afford, like they did, to sell Caicedo and McAllister and then replace them with more 18, 19 and 20-year-olds from South America.
They didn't even do that. They haven't got any young midfielders.
They've got to balance it out. Yes, keep it. Yes, bring in talent, sell on for massive profit, but then use that profit rather than spend 50 million buying 3 children. Spend 50 million and go and get a European quality player.
Yeah, I think they will start to move towards that as they look to seriously challenge Europe. I think the other problem with them losing McAllister and Caicedo and not really bringing anyone of a similar profile is that completely ruined Brighton's rest defence.
Yeah.
Because they set up with their 3 back, because they have 1 full back goes high, the 3 in defence sit in a situational back 3, and then you have the 2 midfielders dropping. And it creates, actually both fullbacks got forward a bit last season. They're a very interesting system, Brighton. It's fun to watch, but they play a very high line, very aggressive football, and that doesn't really work when you haven't got players like Caicedo and McAllister who can hold onto the ball so well, who can retain possession so well. So that's definitely had an impact on them this season. On top of that, injuries have, of course, affected the side. We've spoken about Billy Gilmour a little while ago. I think Jack Hinchelwood's been out injured recently. Adam Webster's currently on a long-term injury. And then you've got Kwara Mitoma and Evan Ferguson both out injured at the moment, who are key players for Brighton. That's their starting striker in Ferguson. If you look at their backup, João Pedro's had a good season. Danny Welbeck's well past it. But they're not the level of Evan Ferguson, and if you look at their options to replace Kwara Mitoma, and also Solly March out injured at the moment, so that leaves their wide options as players like Facundo Buonanotte, who's not played a whole lot of Premier League football. Simon Adingra has been very good this season, in all fairness.
Again, he's a child.
But he is very young, so he's had to burden a lot of the responsibility at quite a young age.
Yeah.
Then you've got Ansu Fati, who's massively fallen short of expectations again. I think that was a poor bit of business in the transfer market. And then you've got Julio Enciso, who's been out with injuries as well this season. So they've had a lot of problems with injuries. They've had a lot of issues with rotation. They haven't really got players in those roles that can come in and do the similar sort of job. I also think it's very difficult to replace someone like Kwara Mitoma because he's incredible, isn't he?
Yeah, he is a very, very good player. And I get injuries, but the problem with De Zerbi, he can't use that. Newcastle, Chelsea, United, Liverpool, all, more teams out there. Luton Town have got Luton Town can barely field 11 players.
Yeah, I think that Luton Town could be the only one you could say are in a worse situation than Brighton, because you make a valid point. Newcastle have had a lot of injuries this season, but they've also spent a lot of money, so they have some squad depth. I know they haven't got a whole lot, and they've got an academy who can come in and fill those roles. You've got Liverpool, who've been able to rely on their academy because they've got a strong academy. Brighton, their academy's quite good, but it's not the level of a Liverpool or a Newcastle academy.
But that's the problem is I get that they've got unlucky, but that's poor planning once again. Similarly to Newcastle, you've got to plan for injuries to come in.
But the resources aren't the same. They're not backed by a sovereign state. They're backed by Tony Bloom.
Yeah, I know, but Tony Bloom's got.
He's a very rich man, but he doesn't own a country.
The problem is, I struggle to see where all the McAllister money went. Yes, they bought in a few more children, but surely you can't blow all that money just on some 18-year-olds.
Yeah, I'm just going to have a look through their transfers. I feel like there's someone I must have forgotten at this point.
I can't.
I mean, they just signed Valentin Barco and Ibrahim Osman for the end of the season, for the start of next season, which is
why?
Because they're planning for the ahead.
I get they're planning ahead, but they need something this season. They're making transfers for next year.
Yeah, they spent 23 million on Carlos Baleba. I think that's a very good signing, but he doesn't immediately replace what you lose in Caicedo. I don't think he's the same level. They signed Igor as well to come into the back line. Again, a good player, but he's not played a whole lot. Verbruggen came in for 15 million. I mean, that's where the McAllister money's gone. They spent 50 million on Baleba, Igor, and Verbruggen.
That's not it. That's not good enough.
Yeah.
And Ansu Fati, a man who has, his form was in a massive low. They took a massive risk on him, and unsurprisingly, it hasn't paid off. But why? And the bit that I don't think falls on, I don't know if it falls on De Zerbi, I don't know who it falls on. But why are you taking gambles like that when you've just qualified for European football?
Well, they lost the head of recruitment, didn't they, to Chelsea? Do you think that could be a
potentially so? Because whoever stepped up, let's go get Ansu Fati.
But I think that was a good signing if you've got players that he can be in competition with. But because Mittermann's been out injured, and because he is their only left winger, suddenly Fati's had to play a bit more. He's not really played anyway because Adingra's played over him, so it's been difficult for him to sort of settle at Brighton. I don't think there's never really been a clear idea of how that was going to work. So I think that's quite interesting. I also think given the Brighton model, they'd rather prioritise young players like Adingra, who they could sell on for 60, 70 million in 2 years' time or a year's time, rather than Ansu Fati, who's leaving at the end of the season back to Barcelona. Yeah. So I feel like there's definitely a bit of conflict there in what they're looking to do and who they have in the squad at the moment. I also think, we talk about them signing young players, but last summer they added James Milner and Mahmoud Dahoud. Neither of those are young players, and neither of them offer that same sort of resale value. You're not selling Milner on for 50 million.
I don't know.
You're not selling him on for anything. He's going to retire. So I feel like they've definitely tried to switch so they become a side who are competing for Europe, but perhaps didn't really. I think they underestimated how much of a chance that was going to be because they sold Caicedo for 120 million. Where has that money gone? Yeah. They've spent the McAllister money, sure, but they've still got 120 million from Caicedo, 30 million from Robert Sanchez that have not done anything with.
He's done great.
In other news, Bet365 have got a great new headquarters, so completely unrelated though. Let's talk about as well the schedule this season, because I think that's definitely had an impact. Brighton have gone, it's the same thing Newcastle have had. Brighton have gone from playing, no European football to suddenly having European football. That obviously has an impact.
It does, but you have to adjust. Again, you're a big...
Teams can't. It's not something you can just adjust to. As proven by Newcastle this season, you are going to pick up more injuries.
You want to fight in the big leagues, you want to fight at the top, you want to be in European football, you've got to adjust to it. If you want to win trophies, that's how the teams do it. Teams that win trophies, they know how they play every 3 days, but they manage it and they do it and they still win those games.
I completely agree with what you're saying, but I do think that takes time. You've got to get the right people in the right places. You've got to have a fitness team and a physio team that know how to deal with playing every 3 days. That's certainly a completely different challenge because it is a lot more difficult to manage minutes.
I do think they got a little bit unfortunate that they did draw Roma in the Europa League because
they had a tough group as well. To be fair,
and I think they got out of their group. We can't say the same about Newcastle, but that's a bit harsh. But I know. I was gonna say. But and there's different competition. But for Brighton, they got out of their group. They did okay. I wouldn't be too disappointed that they're out. The bit that I'll be disappointed in is the way they went out because that mannerism in that loss was really poor. But I do. I get what you mean. It is very hard to adjust, but the problem is they've got to wake up quickly if they want to fight at the top.
I think what's really interesting is, for me, if Brighton and Aston Villa had finished the other way round in the table last season, I think they may be the opposite places in the table this season. Because if Brighton had Conference League football this season, they'd had a better chance to play young players. Perhaps they wouldn't have panicked and signed players for the Europa League. and they would have had more time to develop looking at this
Villa
season.
would have managed better. It's a more experienced unit there for me.
But they've not signed players for the Europa League, really. They already had a lot of players there.
Yeah,
so it's hard to say.
I think they have players because for me, you look at Watkins, Diarra, Bailey, they all, everyone, most of that team. You've got a manager who's won the competition before. So I think that, for Brighton, I do think, and I think, to be honest, as we'll get on to in a minute, I think this whole situation comes down to inexperience. But yeah.
Yeah, probably so. So, is Roberto De Zerbi overrated?
Well, that's my point. I don't think he is. I think he's a very, very good manager and he plays good football, but he is just inexperienced. He's very new to European football.
Very new to management.
He's very new to management, very new to European football like Brighton are, and he still hasn't adjusted to the Premier League for me. And I know that sounds strange because Brighton have finished 6th and are now 10th, but the way he goes, I think the football's brilliant, but the way he goes about playing that football, you can't afford to do in the Premier League. You can't rock up at the big team, and I know they've beaten Arsenal before, I know they've beaten City before, but you can't expect to rock up with the big teams and play the way they do, because as we found out, Brighton have beat Arsenal 3 times, but once Arsenal and once Arteta and Guardiola and all the other managers work out how De Zerbi plays, if he doesn't adjust that for the big side, they will get trounced every game by the top 6, and then suddenly you don't get Europe and you're joining Fulham in the weird let's sit in the middle of the table and do nothing.
I have to say I disagree. I think that the reason that De Zerbi, I like De Zerbi's commitment to keep playing attacking football. I think that's very good. It's similar actually to what Arteta was doing at Arsenal when he didn't have the right players. De Zerbi's in a similar situation. He doesn't have the right players to play his football. Now, the reason they've fallen off is because they lost quality players like Caicedo and McAllister who would maintain the balance in what is quite an open midfield. You'd have players like Caicedo and McAllister who add that quality, bring that extra level, and that certainly makes a difference. I think that, coupled with the fact they've had a lot of injuries, coupled with the fact they've had to play a lot more games, meaning more injuries, meaning a lot more rotation, has just seen them sort of, because they've not focused on anything, they've dropped the ball everywhere. Because they've tried to balance it out. It's not really worked out for them. I understand, why they've done that. They wanted to compete on all fronts this season. A little bit too ambitious, a little bit too quickly. I still feel they can get Europe this season. I think a West Ham drop-off is still on the cards. Chelsea are very inconsistent. United have been they might just keep getting lucky and end up 6th. But you've got to imagine they've got to lose a game at some point that they deserve to lose. I feel like Brighton are in a really good position to take advantage of that. And even if they're not, a season without European football might just be what they need to just settle back into rhythm. And I think De Zerbi is still in a good position. I still feel that, when Liverpool are looking this summer at replacing him, the only reason they're replacing Young Klopp, the only reason they're not looking at De Zerbi is because there's a £20 million buyout clause on him. Now, Liverpool don't want to spend 20 million.
Tony Bloom means he's going on another holiday again.
He's always on holiday. I think, though, when clubs like Manchester City look to replace Pep Guardiola, De Zerbi's going to be on that list. Because Guardiola, we know, is a big fan of Roberto De Zerbi and the way he plays football. He's spoken about that in the past. And we know that who replace him, he will have a huge say in, because the sporting director is still Ziki Bergerstein, and I feel like he will talk to Guardiola. He will be talking to Guardiola. Who do you think is going to be your best replacement? Who should come in after you? That's going to be a very different conversation to what's going on at Liverpool, where Klopp's very much like, I'm gone. I don't care what happens after me. Do what you want. I feel like Guardiola, given his relationship with the director of football, is going to want to secure City's future. And is there a manager more suited to playing Pep-style football than De Zerbi right now? I'm not sure there is, unless you're going to look at Thiago Motta, but I feel like he's going to go to either Juventus or Barcelona. So De Zerbi, given his Premier League experience, I think is still in a really good position to take that Man City job when it comes. I think that will probably be next summer. That next season's got to be about putting the Brighton team in a position where he proves that he can compete. And that may well be 5th in the Premier League. I think that's not too unobtainable. It's got to be minimum Europe for me if he seriously wants that City job. But I guess we'll have to wait and see. But it's going to be very interesting to see what happens over the next year. For me, De Zerbi is, I'm going to controversially say maybe he is overrated. I feel like, but it depends who you're talking about. Because I feel like the general public underrate Zerbi, which feels weird, and the media underrate Zerbi. But I feel like your tactico guys who love passes and not actually going up the field, I feel like they are a bit overrating De Zerbi at the moment. So it's hard to judge. But for me, the general public underrates Roberto De Zerbi.
Fair enough.
All right. We are back. When are we live this week? We're live for Champions League football tonight if you're watching this on the Wednesday. If you are not, then we'll be back next week with both Champions League ties. So very exciting stuff. Watch our live streams. If you have enjoyed today's video, make sure to leave a like and a comment. And if you want to keep watching, you can check out the video on screen now where we talk about Championship football and who's going to win the Championship. That's everything from us this week. Thank you guys very, very much for watching and we'll see you next time.
See ya.